Today we're going to be mastering Fujifilm GFX100RF. Whether you're coming from Sony, Nikon, Leica, or any other camera system including Fujifilm, this camera has a few quirks and a few secrets that if you know, you can really get the full potential from this camera. Although this camera shares the same sensor size as Fujifilm GFX100 II, I find that most of its similarities end there, and it shoots more similarly to Fujifilm X100 VI, and if you're coming from that camera, it might be an easy pickup, but if you're not coming from that camera, you probably have a lot to learn. So as you can see, this camera is sized somewhere in between the X100 VI and the GFX100 II, and moving this camera to the side and this camera to the side, we can take a deeper look at Fujifilm GFX100RF. And let's start with the front of the camera. The front of Fujifilm GFX100RF may look pretty simple, but it is a little more complex than you would think. The simple part is the lens with the lens hood, and then above that is the focus and LED. Now the interesting part is when we come to the left-hand side here, we have this scrollable wheel, which if you're new to Fujifilm is called a command dial. So this would be the front command dial. Usually the front command dial clicks in, but because it's built into a more intricate system, this one does not click in. Above the command dial is the on and off switch for the camera, and below the command dial is a lever which allows you to change the digital zoom on the camera. To the right of this whole mechanism, we have another lever, and in this lever we can either push it to the left or the right to activate custom functions, or we can actually hold it to the left or hold it to the right to do custom actions. Because this mechanism doesn't allow the command dial to push in, you can actually push in this button inside of this lever system that allows you to change what this command dial does. Now let's check out the bottom of the camera. There's not much going on the bottom except for a 1/4-20, which allows you to attach tripod plates and other mounting mechanisms. And also you have the battery door here, which takes the bigger style Fujifilm batteries that are found in the XH2S and the GFX systems. On the right side of the camera, we just have a door right here, which has 2 SD card slots. This is very handy in case you want to duplicate the files that you're recording with this camera. For me, I just have one SD card in the one slot, which is on the bottom, and the second slot is actually the one on the top. The left side of the camera is very similar to the right. On the top here, we have a microphone port, then we have a headphone port right under that, and then we have a USB-C port that can be used for charging the camera or transferring images, and then we have a micro HDMI. Coming to the top of the camera, you can see that the Fujifilm GFX100RF is engraved here on the left side. You have a Fujifilm hot shoe right here, which can be used with compatible Fujifilm accessories. The first dial that we're going to get to this camera is the shutter speed dial, which you can see you could turn in either direction here. And then if you lift up on this dial, this is actually where the ISO dial is. It's on the inside of the shutter dial. So you could turn this either way once again. And then once you're satisfied with your ISO, all you have to do is press down and then you can change the shutter speed again. The next dial that we have is the exposure compensation dial, which once again, you can turn either way. Above both these dials, you have the on-off switch that we saw on the front, and inside of this on-off switch, you have the shutter button, which is threaded, which means you can add a custom shutter button, and you could either half press this to focus, or you could full press this to take a photo. And then the last button on the top is this custom button right to the right of the shutter button. The last thing that you can see from the top of the camera is the aperture wheel on the lens. You can turn this from f4 all the way to f22, or you can select auto aperture, which I will show you how to select a programmable aperture in the menu system later. And then finally, you have this wheel here. When you're in manual focus, this will manual focus the camera. And when you're not in manual focus, this can do a custom action. And then as we flip this camera to the back, you can see that you can actually view the aspect ratio from the top, but this dial is more seen from the back. So you could see that rotate around, and it has these 2 dots to help you know which aspect ratio you're on, but you would have to go back to the top to see the correct aspect ratio that you need to be in. But now let's check out the back of the camera. On the left side here, we have the electronic viewfinder, which has a sensor. So when you press your face up against it, it will switch from the back LCD into the electronic viewfinder. And on the left side here, we have a diopter, so you can adjust this to focus to your eye. To the right of the electronic viewfinder, you can select your autofocus method, which goes from single, continuous, or manual focus. Then we have that aspect ratio dial that we talked about before, and to the right of that, we have the auto exposure lock and auto focus lock button to the right of that. We have our second rear command dial, which we can see here, and unlike the front one, this one can be pushed in to access a custom function. Below this rear command dial, we have the quick menu or the Q button here, which is very useful in the camera later. And then we have this joystick, which in Fujifilm cameras is called the focus lever. This can be pointed in almost any direction, and it can also be pushed in to do a custom function. Below the focus lever, we have the menu OK button, then we have the display and back button, then we have the play button, and then we have the drive and delete button. And the last thing to note on the Fujifilm GFX100RF is that this is a waist level screen. So that was a walkthrough of the body of Fujifilm GFX100RF. Now we're going to jump into the menus, and then we're going to put both the menus and the walkthrough of the layout together, and I'm going to show you how to shoot with this camera optimally. Once you hit the menu button, you are welcomed into the Fujifilm menu system. And if you are new to this menu system, we're going to do a brief overview of that. On the left-hand side, you have the groups of the menus. We have the image quality, the autofocus manual focus, shoot in, flash, setup, networking, and USB, and then my menu. So let's start off in the image quality section. So the first thing that we want to change in this camera is the image quality. We want to make sure that we are shooting a RAW file, but we're also shooting a JPEG. We want to be shooting a JPEG because if you don't shoot a JPEG with this camera, you can't access the aspect ratio dial. You have to be shooting a JPEG with your RAW to make sure that this aspect ratio dial works properly. In image size, you could select medium or small, but you get about the same amount of pictures if you choose large, so large is the best option. For RAW recording, I'm going to be actually using the lossless compressed files. These still shoot 16-bit color, and these files are a lot smaller, so I found that because they don't lose any data and they're smaller, this is the best output. The next group of settings have to do with Fujifilm simulations, and for this camera, the way that I like to set it up is that I have at least one custom profile that has none of these settings turned on. This is going to make sure that I could just see the image, how the camera is going to see it in a RAW version, but then I also have other custom settings set up to make sure that I could see how a nice JPEG with this camera would come out. We're going to set up a default profile first by setting everything to just 0 and then saving a custom setting. So the way we're going to do that is set the film simulation to standard, grain off, color chrome FX off, smooth skin off, dynamic range we want to keep at 100, derange priority off, white balance you can set to whatever, tone curve off, color off, sharpness off, high ISO noise reduction off, long exposure noise reduction off, color space sRGB, don't have to touch pixel mapping, and then you could just go in here and you could do edit or save custom setting. And the way that I do it is in my C1, I'm going to save this profile as default. So once you save this profile, you can just go ahead and edit the custom name. And like I said, I just named this default, and this is going to be just my raw process of the camera if I want to see what it's going to look like. But more likely than not, I'm going to be in a different custom setting so I could see a better view through this camera and I could get aesthetic JPEGs with this camera. So we're just going to hop into one of my custom settings here. I'll go into my Portrait 400 recipe, and now we're going to shoot back up to the image quality menu, and we're going to walk through what these settings actually do. So film simulations are essentially the color profiles of this camera, and for my Portrait 400 recipe, the film simulation that I like to use is Classic Chrome. You can cycle through these. There are 20 different film simulations in here that you can use to create recipes. So if you want to create one, you can create one while doing this. You can copy the one I'm going to give you if you want to, but this is my Portrait 400 recipe, and we're going to go with Classic Chrome. For the grain effect, this is what gives you that roughness and texture on your photos. I go with strong and small. Color chrome effect is kind of like vibrance. For this recipe, I like to keep it on strong. I really am a big fan of color. If you're not into color that much in your photos, you can keep this at weak or off. For color chrome FX blue, this is only impacting that blue chroma, and for this, I also like to keep this at strong. For smooth skin effect, I do keep this off, and for this custom profile, I'm doing dynamic range 400. Now, dynamic range is an interesting setting, and you definitely need to know what is happening. So what happens at DR200 and DR400 is it's kind of the process that your iPhone does that gets that HDR look. If you're primarily shooting JPEGs, DR400 definitely looks the best because it is going to bring your highlights down 2 stops, and in most scenarios, aka bright days where the shadows and highlights are different, this is going to make your JPEG image give that Fujifilm look. But if you're shooting RAW, this is going to bring your base ISO up to 320, which means you're not getting the cleanest image possible, which means that shooting at DR400 would actually hinder your RAW file experience without adding any additional benefits. So for that reason, if you're doing RAW mostly, do DR100, but if you're doing JPEGs and you're doing a recipe, DR400 or DR200 is definitely the best. For dynamic range priority, you leave this off because you're selecting the dynamic range up here. For white balance in this recipe, the thing that's really cool about Fujifilm cameras is that when you click into the white balance, you can actually shift the white balance a ton. You can take it green, you can take it blue, purple, or red, orange. So for this recipe that I have, I'm doing red 2, blue -6. This gives me a nice orange glow, and it really helps with that portrait look. For tone curve, this is something that's awesome inside of Fujifilm cameras. You can click into this and you can actually build an S-curve or an inverted S-curve. For me, I'm doing an inverted S-curve, which means I'm getting less contrast in my photos, which helps with that pastel portrait look. So I go -2 highlights, -2 shadows, which is the most low contrast curve you can get. If you want contrast, you can bring it up to something like 1:1. That's going to give you a lot more contrast. But as you can see, if you keep bringing this up, it's going to make your photo extremely contrasty. But for me and for my portrait recipe, I want these to be low contrast. So -2, -2 is the way for me. For color, I leave this at 0 because I don't want to be over processed with the color chrome effects. Sharpness is the same thing. I feel like this can over process the image, so I leave this at 0. High ISO noise reduction goes to -4 because allegedly at 0, there is some high ISO noise reduction being applied, and only at -4 is it truly off. For clarity, we turn that to 0 because we don't want any processing on those images that way. Long exposure noise reduction we have is off. Color space is sRGB. Pixel mapping we don't touch. You can once again go into the edit and save custom setting, and you can go and save this in C2, C3, C4, 5, 6, 7. And then all you have to do is once you do that, you just go in here, edit the custom name. You can name this Portrait 400 by Kyler or Portrait 400, whatever you want to name it. Or if you create your own custom recipe, you can give it your own custom name. I don't like my recipes to change unless I want them to change. So I disable the auto update custom setting. So every time I turn the camera off, all of the custom settings will reset to how I had them unless I go into the edit menu and then I save them again. Now let's do a quick recap of the image quality page. The first thing that we want to do is make sure we're shooting in JPEG and RAW. The other thing that we want to do is we want to set up 2 custom profiles, one default to know what the RAW file is going to look like, and then one for JPEGs, which is going to be used for the film simulations. Once you have at least 2 recipes, then you can easily switch between one recipe that's used for fun and one recipe that is used for work. All right, so now we are on page 2, which is the autofocus and manual focus page. For autofocus mode, we want to have this at all. You can see that we could select single, zone, or wide. For zone custom settings, you could just copy this. Zone custom 1, 7:3, zone custom 2, 9:5, zone custom 3, 11:7. For AF mode, all settings, you can go in here and you could turn off some of these selections, but I'm gonna leave them all on. So now we're gonna go back up to focus area, and if you click this is gonna show you all of those points, and you can use the front command dial or the rear command dial to cycle through. As you can see, you have single point, and there are a ton of different single point sizes. Then once you get out of that, you enter the zone 3:3, 5:5, 7:7, and then you're gonna enter the custom ones that we set up, which is the rectangles. So you have the small, medium, large rectangle, and then finally the all or wide focus zone. The next thing that we have to go over is the AFC custom settings. This is for autofocus continuous. This doesn't apply to AFS. Then you just can select between a different selection of pre-made autofocus custom settings. You have set 1, multi-purpose, set 2, set 3, set 4, set 5, and then you even have a custom one that you can set up for yourself. You can choose the track and sensitivity, the speed of the track and sensitivity, and the zone area switch-in. For me, I don't really use AFC that much, but if I was, I would just use multi-purpose, so that's the one that I'm gonna select. Store AF mode by orientation, off. AF point display, off. Wrap focus point, this would be if you bring the focus point to one side of the screen, it'll come to the other side. I disable this. If you want that, you can enable it. Number of focus points, 117. Pre-autofocus off, autofocus illuminator off. Face eye detection setting, I actually do set this to face detection on just in case I'm doing portraits, and I do eye auto. For subject detection, if you turn this on, it's gonna turn the face and eye detection off, and this is just for planes, cars, other things, so I don't use that at all. Autofocus plus manual focus, I keep this off. So all these manual focus settings, the MF assist and interlock, MF assist and focus train, those are off. Focus check off, interlock spot AE and focus area on. Instant AF setting, AFS, depth of field field scale pixel. Release and focus priority is pretty interesting. We're gonna hop into this one. This is basically when you are in AFS or AFC, you can choose if you want your camera to focus before taking the picture or to release before focus, essentially. So if you have this set at release priority, the camera is gonna feel a little more snappy, but you might have photos that are out of focus more. If you do the focus priority, the camera might feel like it's lagging a bit, but it is going to have more shots in focus. For me, I keep both of these on focus because I don't want to take a 100 megapixel photo that's out of focus. Touchscreen mode, I'm a big touchscreen hater on these cameras. I'm gonna keep this off, but if I was going to do anything, I would do touch autofocus because it's kind of like an iPhone. You could just touch wherever you want to focus. So that's the autofocus and manual focus pages. Let's go over the key points inside of these menus. The first thing that's important here is that we set our AF mode to all. If you use continuous autofocus, you want to remember the AFC custom page. Face eye detection and subject detection are both in this menu page. And finally, the last thing that you want to remember is the release and focus priorities here. The third page that we're looking at is the shoot-in setting. For self-timer, I'm going to skip over all of these settings because I think interval timer is a lot better. If you don't know what an interval timer is like a self-timer, except you can choose to keep shoot-in shots, so you don't have to keep running back to the camera to reset the self-timer. So for interval timer shoot-in, if you want to turn this on, you just go in here, you'll do within camera timer, and then you'll just set this interval to usually about 3 seconds, and then you'll set the number of times to infinity. And then when you turn this on, this camera is just going to take a picture every 3 seconds. So it's essentially a self-timer, except it's keep going at 3 seconds. Interval timer shooting exposure, you could turn this off. In interval priority mode, you could turn this off. The next things that we have are the auto exposure bracket, the film simulation bracket, and the focus bracket. Personally, I do not bracket, and I do not plan on bracketing with this camera. For shutter type, always keep this at mechanical shutter. The electric shutter could have some bad side effects, so just keep this at MS. Flicker reduction, we have off. For the ISO auto settings, this is very important, especially if you're going to be shooting in aperture priority or shutter priority. For default sensitivity on all auto 1, 2, and 3, we're always going to keep this at the lowest at 80. But then for max sensitivity for auto 1, I'm going to keep this at 1600 ISO. And for minimum shutter speed, I'm going to keep this at 1/250th. Now, I'm going to keep the minimum shutter speed at 1/250th because 1/250th is about the shutter speed that it takes to freeze a human motion when it comes to walk-in. For auto 2, I'm going to double the max sensitivity and half the shutter speed. And then for auto ISO 3, once again, I'm going to half that shutter speed and I'm going to double that max sensitivity. Just remember, if you're in auto 3, that there is no IBIS in this camera, so you want to make sure at 1/60th you're really holding this camera steady. Digital teleconverter we keep off, but remember you can select that up here in the front. ND filter we're going to keep off and we're going to assign that to a custom button later. Wireless communication you don't have to worry about. So that is page 3, and let's go over the most important settings inside of this menu system. The first thing that we want to note here is that interval timer shoot-in is the superior version of self-timer. The next thing to note is that shutter type should always be set to mechanical shutter. The third and final thing is that we want to set up our ISO auto settings here to have different sensitivities for different times of day, and most of the time you're probably going to be using auto 1 or auto 2. So the fourth icon down, we have the flash setting page. If you do put a flash on this, then you can choose between TTL, manual, but this camera has no built-in flash, so we're going to skip over that. So the fifth icon down, we have the setup page. This has all of the custom stuff. So these pages we're going to take slow and get all the custom settings set up correctly. So we're going to hop into the first one, which is the user pages. And as you can see, this is one thing you're going to want to remember, which is the format. This is how you format your SD cards, and you can choose between slot 1 or slot 2 if you have that. For area setting, date, time, and time difference, and the language, you should have set this up when you first turn on the camera. Since I didn't initialize it in the beginning, I kind of skipped over that. For my menu setting, we're going to go in here and we're going to select everything that I'm either not going to have access to on the camera or not going to put on a custom button. So I'm just going to go into the rank items here so you can see which ones I picked. And for number 1, I have interval timer shoot-in, and then I also have the face and eye detection settings and the subject detection settings. I would add more to the My Menu page if I could add some stuff inside of this user setup, such as the format SD card, but you can't do that. And for that reason, you just have to remember where a lot of stuff is in the Fujifilm menu system. And that's probably my number 1 biggest complaint about the Fujifilm menu system, is you have to remember where stuff is, such as format, because you cannot put that into the My Menu page. And just to show you, if you hit add items, you have options to do a lot of these pages, but if you come down to the custom one, you see you can't do user, sound, button, power, or save. You can just do some of the screen ones, and they don't even let you choose all of them. So below the My Menu page for photo, you have the My Menu page for video. And I'm going to straight up say it, but I don't think this is a good camera for video. I think this is a very photo-centric camera. If you did want to do video with this camera, I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. Just shoot 422, 4K, 10 bits, f-log2. Other than that, I don't really recommend this camera for video. Shutter count just tells you what your shutter count is. Battery age tells you what your battery age is. If you need to update your firmware, you can do it here. You can reset or initialize the camera here, and then support website, regulatory, we'll just skip over. For sounds, this is personal preference, but I keep absolutely everything off. So off, 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 off. For playback volume for video, you can set that to whatever you want, and 4-channel audio playback, don't have to worry about. For view mode settings, you're just gonna keep both of these at sensor. For EVF brightness, you could just change this to whatever is most comfortable for your eye, which is usually the auto, and then EVF color adjustment, and then also the LCD color and LCD color adjustment. Do not touch these. Do not change the color here. This color will not show up in your photo. It will only show up on your screen. So if you change this to be very green, then when you transfer these photos from your camera into your laptop, they're not going to be green. It's just the screen looking green. So do not change any of these color adjustments here. For LCD brightness, this is one of those menu pages that you're going to have to remember, because if you use the LCD a lot, especially during the bright day, you're going to have to come in here and turn it up here. For image display, you can keep this off. Auto rotate displays, personally, I don't like my camera to rotate because I find it rotating when I don't want it to, so I turn this to off. Preview exposure and white balance in manual mode, you want that to be yes. Natural live view off. F-log view assist, if you end up doing video, you do 100% want to keep this on. Electronic level setting, we're going to have as off initially, but we are going to add this to a custom button. Framing guidelines, we're going to keep at the grid 9 or the rule of thirds grid. Surround view, this is for the aspect ratio dial. You can have this be just a line, transparent, or black, and we're just going to keep this at black. For auto rotate on playback, we want to keep that off. Playback magnification, actual size, focus scale units, this depends on your country. For me, I'm in the US, so I have feet, but most people will probably do meters. Dual display setting, you don't have to worry about this. Display custom setting, we're going to hop into here. I'm going to show you what I keep on for my camera, but this is very subjective. All of these are little indicators on the LCD that show you what you're shooting, and it can be very helpful if you use certain things or not helpful if you don't. So for me, I keep frame and guideline, which is the rule of thirds, on. The focus frame, which is the box, on. The focus indicator, which is a little green light when it is in focus, on. I turn off the autofocus distance indicator, but I keep on the manual focus distance indicator. Histogram, I turn off in this, but I do have a custom button for that, which we will get into. Live view highlight alert off. Shoot in mode I keep on to know which mode I'm in, whether that's aperture priority or manual. Some aperture speed and ISO I keep on. Information background I keep on. I change exposure compensation to the digit instead of the scale. Focus mode, photometry, shutter type, flash, all off. Continuous mode, dual IS, touchscreen mode, all off. White balance I keep on. Film simulation, dynamic range, boost mode, frames remaining, all off. Image size and quality I keep off. Aspect ratio I keep on. Movie mode and record time I keep off. Digital teleconverter I keep on. Communication status, mic level, guidance, and no storage media I keep off. Date time off. Battery level on. Frame and outline off. That is the way I set up my custom display, and if you want to take a look at that, it's very clean. It just has the shutter speed, aperture, exposure compensation, and the ISO on the bottom here, along with the battery and the shoot-in mode, and then it has the aspect ratio in the top right. And if I change the digital teleconverter, you could see that change down here. And if you don't know much about the Fujifilm cameras, if you hit the display button on the back, you can go from your information to a nice clean screen, and then you have a page that has a ton more information. So the page we set up is kind of the middle ground where you see the image and you see all of the data that you want. And then if you hit that again, you have absolutely no data and just your image. And then you hit it again, you have all of your data. For large indicators, you keep this off, because if you do, then that kind of destroys the display custom settings page. So just keep this off. Don't go into the large indicators display setting, because that will override this display custom settings page. For information contrast adjustment, I keep this at high. This is just for the menu pages. You could keep it at standard, or you could even do red for night. For location info, we're going to keep this off. Q menu background, I actually turn this to black. The transparent is a little too much for me. So for button and dial, we leave focus lever setting on. Then we have quick menus for both photo and video. Not going to touch the video one, but for the photo one, we're going to do 16 slots. And for this, I'm going to set up my film simulations here. So we have image quality, image size, film simulation, white balance, color chrome effect, color chrome effect blue, sharpness, clarity, highlight tone, shadow tone, and then dynamic range, high ISO noise reduction, grain effect, and then smooth skin effect. For the function FN settings, this is all the custom buttons inside of the camera. For FN1, which is this top custom button, we're gonna have this be select custom setting. This is gonna allow us to switch from that raw profile to the custom JPEG files very quickly. For FN2, which is that button on the focus lever, this is going to change the front command dial switch. This is essential. I recommend not changing this one no matter what. So next, if we take a look at this lever, if I pull it to the right, I kind of have it like a pop-up flash where it will select the flash function settings. This will be handy if you put a top flash into this hot shoe. Then if I hold it to the right, this is going to bring up the histogram. And then in the opposite, where if you pull it to the right, it would add flash and more light. If I push it to the left, I have it set to turn the ND filter on. And then also, if I hold it to the left, it's going to turn on the electronic level switch, which is going to be really good to pair up with the histogram if I want a little more data on my screen. For the AEL and AFL button, I'm going to change this to AF on, and this is for everyone that uses back button focus. For the rear command dial, if you press that in, I have that set to focus check. For the Q button, I have this set up to bring up the quick menu. And then for TFN1, 2, and 3, and 4, these are all the touch functions, and I turn all these off because I do not like to use the touch screen, and that is all the custom buttons on the camera. So for command dial settings, we can then select the front and back command dial functions. And we can see for the front command dial, I have it set for 1 to be aperture, 2 to be ISO, 3 to be exposure compensation, and then 4 to be none. So when you hit that front button next to the lever, it's going to cycle between aperture, ISO, and exposure compensation. If it's not able to be changed because you're on a direct number, it will not select that. And then the rear command dial, I have that set to be shutter speed. For SS operation, we can just keep that on. Command dial direction, I didn't change these at all. So for shutter AF, I highly recommend leaving AFS and AFC on, even if you're a back button focus user. And the reason behind that is if you turn this camera into manual mode, this AEL AFL button will still work to focus the camera even though it's in manual focus mode. It just disables that half press click on the shutter here. For shutter auto exposure, just leave these at default. Shoot without card, leave this at off so the camera doesn't fire unless there's a memory card in it. There is no internal memory in this camera, so do not shoot without a card. For all of these focus ring operations, we just leave these at default. And then for the control ring, when not in manual focus mode, can either change the white balance or the film simulation. I have this set to change the film simulation. For these two lock mode settings, I just left them at default. For the aperture range setting A, this is essential. We want to change this from auto into command. If you're in auto, you cannot change the aperture with the command dial, but if you are in command, you can both set auto and command. For FN1 button setting, I didn't change this. For touchscreen setting, I turned all of these off, and for lock, I did not change anything here. The fifth page is power management, and for this page, I'm gonna change auto power off to 5 minutes. Gonna change the performance to boost for the EVF resolution, and then shoot in standby mode off, power save off, auto power off temp high. And then for the sixth page, we have the save data setup. For me, for the frame number, I choose to renew. Sometimes when the camera gets really high in the shutter count, it kind of just crashes out when it hits 999999, and that usually doesn't happen, but it has happened to me, so I just renew it so it never happens. For edit file name, I just change this to be GFX-R just so I know I'm shooting with this camera. For card slot setting, I have this set to sequential. If you have 2 slots in, you can choose between backup and separate. Don't set it if you don't have 2 cards, because then the camera will not shoot because it won't have that second slot to back up or separate if you have that set up. So if you only have 1 card in, set it to sequential. For select folder, I just left this at default. For copyright info, I'm going to display my info, which is just my name, Kyler Steele, and then the copyright will be all rights reserved. Just enter your author's info and enter the copyright info here, and then when you display it, it should just be your name with all rights reserved. For IPTC and geotagging, I have these off. So that was the setup page, and there were 6 other pages inside of this one. one, we're gonna go over the most important things inside of each one. Inside of the user page, the most important things here are the format to format the SD card, the My Menu page for photo, and then finally the firmware update in case you need to update this camera. In sound setup, there's nothing that important in here. You either turn all of these sounds on or you turn all of these sounds off. For screen setup, if we go in here, you have your EVF brightness and you have your LCD brightness, which you should 100% remember that they're in this page. Then on the third page of the screen settings, you have display custom settings, which allows you to see what you want to display on your LCD. For the fourth page, you have button and dial settings. And in here, you want to change the quick menu for photo, which I set up to be all about the film simulations. You have all of the custom buttons in the function FN settings, which you can change in this menu page. And then you have the command dial settings, which you can change the front one by pressing N, and the back one can be set to one function. You also have the control range setting, which can only be changed between white balance and film simulation. And then one of the most important things, like I said, is the aperture range setting, which is A. You want to change this to not act as auto, but to act as command. In power management, you just want to have the power off be 5 minutes and you want the performance to be boosted. In save data, you just want to set your copyright info here. The sixth page is also another quick one like the flash page. We don't have to go through much here. If you want to connect your phone via Bluetooth, you just go in here and download the Fuji X app, and that is going to allow you to connect this camera for both firmware updates and transferring photos from this camera to your phone. Airplane mode, network setting, Instax, frame IO, camera to cloud, connection mode, USB power supply, information, and the reset network settings. Most people aren't going to go through any of these, but if you do have something like an Instax printer or you do use frame IO, camera to cloud, then just know that those are all in these network settings and we're not going to go over any of these. And the last page is the My Menu, which we set up before, and that we just set up to be the interval timer, the face eye detection, and the subject detection. Okay, so we've walked through the camera and we've walked through the menu systems on the camera, but none of that matters if you don't know how to put those two things together. So now we're gonna walk through this. I'm gonna show you how to use this camera in manual, in aperture priority, how to access all of the custom things that we set up inside this camera, and I'm gonna be given all of the secrets that I have so you know how to access the most from this camera. Now let's hop into it. So the first secret that I wanna hop into with this camera is hitting this display back button on the back of the camera. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that if you want to see the actual battery percentage of your camera, it is only available on this page in this top right corner. All right, now the first thing I'm gonna show you how to do is to set this camera in auto mode. If you're ever frustrated with this camera, you can't figure it out and you need a break, the first thing you wanna do is just get this camera into auto. And the way that we're gonna do that is set everything in this camera to the letter A. So if we go up here, we can set the shutter speed dial to A, we can lift up on the ISO dial, set this to A, and then we can move all the way over here and set this aperture dial to A. Now, because we set the aperture dial at A to be a custom function, we just have to go on this front command dial and we have to move this all the way to the right. If you bring it anywhere to the left, you could see that it is changing the aperture in the camera. But if you go all the way to the right past F22, that puts it in auto and then it set it back to F4. If you can't change your aperture with that front command dial, remember that we have to press in this button near the lever, and that's going to cycle between any of the appropriate things that we can change. As you can see, since everything else is in A, mine will not cycle, but as we change that, then you will see that it will be able to be cycled through. So now we have this camera in auto and you could go around, you can shoot pictures with this, it will be perfectly fine. But how do we put this back into manual mode? Well, the first thing that we could do is we could just change the shutter speed to any number on this top dial. We can lift up and we can change this ISO to any ISO on side of this dial, and we can change this aperture range to any aperture on this dial. So now we're in full manual. The exposure compensation button will not do anything because we are in full manual, and that is the first way to go full manual. Now, some people like myself want a little more control, and for that reason, I'm going to show you guys how to get in full manual, but without having to turn these dials and using just the command dials. So to get in full manual with these command dials, you need to change all the buttons to either T, C, or for the aperture, it's A, but remember we changed that to C in the menus. So the first thing we're gonna do here is change the shutter speed to T. T allows you to change the shutter speed with this rear command dial that we set up. So now you can go to any shutter speed that you want. We have 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 13 seconds. So if you want to access shutter speeds that you normally can't on this dial, you have to go T and then use this rear command dial. Similarly, if we want to do the ISO, but we don't want to mess around with pulling this up and then finding the correct ISO, we don't go to A, we go to C. So when we go to C, now we can change the ISO with this front command dial. And the way that we do that is we push in this button, and now you can see on the bottom here, this blue moon kind of shape, you see it has a blue half circle that allows us to change this rear command dial because it's the half circle point in this way. But the half circle on top is now above the ISO, and we can now change the ISO with the front command dial. And you can see we could go ISO high, any of these other high ISOs. And then we can also choose between our auto ISOs. So we have ISO auto 1, ISO auto 2, and ISO auto 3 that we set up. And then finally, we're gonna change this aperture ring back to A, but instead of keeping it all the way to the right to be in that auto mode, we're just gonna push in that button again. You're gonna see that logo pop over to the aperture, and now we can change our aperture with this. And if we wanna quickly change our ISO too, we just push in that button. We can then change the ISO, push in that button, change the aperture, and then the rear command dial always is gonna allow us to change the shutter speed no matter what. We don't have to push in anything. So that's the 2 ways that you could shoot this camera in manual mode. Now I'm gonna show you guys how I actually shoot with this camera, which is not auto, it's aperture priority. Now the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my shutter speed to auto because that's what you need for aperture priority. Then I'm gonna keep my ISO on C. I'm gonna push in this button, and I am going to set the ISO to one of my custom ISOs. I'm gonna go with ISO auto 2 here, which is the 6400 one. And then on the front, I'm actually going to use the aperture on the lens. So my exposure triangle is going to be the aperture on the ring, the ISO on the front dial here, and then I'm gonna have exposure compensation, which I can just change with this dial right here. That is how I change it. I don't touch the shutter speed or lift up for the ISO. I just have ring, front command dial, and then the exposure compensation button. Okay, so now we know how to set the camera up in auto. We know how to shoot manual using both the command dials and the physical dials on the camera. And now we know how to shoot aperture priority, probably the best way I think, because it gives you control, but it also lets this camera be used as a point and shoot. Now let's see more about the custom pages that we set up in this camera and those custom buttons. So the first custom button that I want you to remember is this one to the right of the shutter that we set up to change the custom setting. So if we press this button in, we can go from the default, or we could go into the film simulation that we set, and you could see how that impacts the image, which is really, really cool. The next dial that's very important to remember is this aspect ratio dial. If we go in here, we can just change our aspect ratio on the fly. So just remember this aspect ratio dial is available right here, and it's easy to change. But we have the digital teleconverter, so we could turn that on. You could see we could bump it to 45, bump it to 63, bump it to 80, and then we can even pair that up with the aspect ratio dial here. Now let's take a look at this lever on the front, and you see if I push it to the left, the ND filter comes on, push it again, ND filter comes off, push it to the right as my pop-up flash, it'll bring up these flash settings, which if we had a flash, we could change here. And then if we hold this to the right, you could see this will bring up the histogram, which allows us to focus on getting a good image with the camera. And then if I hold it to the left, you'll see that this is going to bring up the 2D level. And then if we hold it to the left again, it'll bring up the 3D level, but we could also just hold that again and turn that off. So this front lever is really good for me to just get some quick settings that I could remember are set up to the front of this camera. If we press in this back command dial here, we can do a zoom in to check our focus, and then we could push it in to back out. We can also use that rear command dial to zoom in even more. If we hit the Q button right here, we have access to see all of our Fujifilm simulation stuff that we have set up. So we can go in here, we can lower the clarity, we can raise the highlights, raise the shadows, we can add grain, and then we could just quickly see that new image. We We could just go in here and we can also reset everything if we wanted to. But if you did mess all of these settings up, remember, because these don't save, all you have to do to get this to be back to normal is just turn the camera off. And when you turn it back on, everything will be back to default and you can mess around with them again. If you did change these and you're really liking the way that it was looking, just come into the menu, go into the edit and save custom setting and just save something in C4, 5, 6, 7, and remember to name that. Now, as you can see, this camera is focusing with this shutter. We can focus anywhere in this, but if we change it to manual focus, this will now not focus on the camera anymore, but we can use the AEL, AFL button that we set up for back button focus. So when in manual mode, we can do back button focus. The last thing that I want to show, the exposure compensation also has that C. So if you change that to the C, then you could once again push in on this front button. And when you see that, you can just change that to the exposure comp, and then you could just change the exposure compensation with this front command dial. I find having it at C is a little more dangerous because if you knock it off C, you either end up at -3 or +3, which completely ruins your photos. But if you keep it at 0 and you nudge it, usually at +0.3 or -0.3, which means the photo is still good. If you're wondering how to change your focus point, you can just use this focus lever to move it around. If you push the focus lever in, then you can use the rear command dial to change the size of this focus point. And then you could also push it in again to recenter the points. And then you could just hit the menu button to back out of that once you're happy with it. If you want to view your images, obviously just hit the playback menu, or you can just back out. And then finally, you have the drive button that we need to go over. If you hit the drive button, you can go into high burst or low burst shooting. I don't recommend burst shooting with this camera. I think the still image is perfectly fine. You also have the ISO brackets, the white balance brackets, the auto exposure brackets. And then one thing that's interesting is the multi-exposure. You can do this in the camera with add, average, light, or dark multi-exposures. If you do this, then the multi-exposure will be a JPEG, but you will keep the raw files. So this is fun if you want to play around with more creative styles inside of the camera. And then finally, the last thing is the video mode, which we didn't go over. Like I said, 422, 10-bit, highest bit rate you can do, and then just shoot in F-Log2, but I don't recommend shooting video with this camera. So for me, I'm mostly going to be sitting in the still image for 99% of the time that I use this camera. One thing that I almost forgot here is that if you change this front wheel, this is going to allow you to cycle through the film simulations. So if you pair this up with a button that we used here, which is the custom settings function, and you could just cycle through film simulations and see how the recipe would look with different film simulations attached. It's a super fun way to also test out recipes very quickly. So that is it. That is Fujifilm GFX100RF. That is everything you need to know about the camera, tips and tricks about the camera, how to use the camera, all the custom functions that I think are really important to Fujifilm. And also, if you found the video helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel. But that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.